Welcome back. If you've ever thought about setting up a side business, a side gig, or a side hustle as it's now known, today's guest is an expert in this area. He is the host of SideHustleNation.com. He's going to be talking today about the most interesting interviews he's had with side hustlers. We're going to be discussing the guy that bought a house by working on Fiverr. Is that possible? What about the lessons from the flea market flipper and how you can make some serious money in flea markets? And finally, find out what the Craigslist guy did to make his side hustle a booming success.
Welcome to this edition of Peak Performers Podcast with your host, Thor Conklin. Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
Thor Conklin here. We give you the tricks, the tips, the tools, the strategy, the technology, and the psychology peak performers use in order to get more done and execute at the highest level. If you know what to do but struggle with getting it all done, or simply want to raise your game to the next level, this podcast is for you. Sit back and enjoy. What's one of your biggest strengths?
Well, one thing that, I would probably point to is just the willingness to try stuff out and maybe the excitement over learning how to do new things. So even it's kind of like I'll give the example, like in high school, like we had to take a foreign language. And at the time I was like, this is the dumbest requirement ever, right? Everyone speaks English, like this is fine. And what kind of came out of that was like, I found out I really enjoyed Spanish. And so I ended up taking 4 years of Spanish, ended up working in the kitchen, in a restaurant where the kitchen staff were all Spanish speakers, ended up, in the painting business, hiring Mexican painters. And it was, a ton of fun to be able to speak Spanish all day. And now every time we travel, like it's like it kind of fires up this other part of your brain. And I've kind of taken that, lesson and like, look, dude, you thought you knew it all and maybe you didn't, into, some of this other, business stuff. There's always more stuff to learn and try and get better at. And like, that's what makes it exciting. I don't know. It's like, if you knew everything, I don't know. So that would be hopefully one skill set that I hope to keep with me.
It's so important what you just brought up, and that is about, not knowing what's going to happen. And that's part of the fun. People always think that I just want everything set. I want to know exactly what happens every moment of every day. That gets boring. That gets really boring. It's the variety that's the spice. So great thoughts there. Now I got to ask you, what's one of your biggest weaknesses?
Probably, I don't know, procrastination or lack of focus. Probably lack of focus. Like, I've got a million different side hustle projects and ideas going on at any one time. And like I said, like, wait, you're going to have to be the one to drive this forward. And sometimes that gets put off or, gets distracted and stuff. So trying to get better about that, practicing the, prioritization and the whole Derek Sivers, hell yes or no thing, and getting better about, recognizing that email is largely reactive time and, all of that stuff that kind of distracts from, what the goals you set out, kind of what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, now isn't it funny how the weakness is very closely tied to the strength? It's like, I'll try anything, and it's like, that's my strength. And it's like, oh, my weakness is, shoot, I'm trying too many things at once. But we all suffer from that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be side hustlers and we wouldn't be entrepreneurs. I mean, that's part of the DNA that makes up who we are.
Yeah, I look at other people and, some people, like, oh, I started around the same time, but like with more focus. And it's like, well, I built this, crazy thing because that's like literally all I did. Like I, ate, slept and breathed this thing. And sometimes like, I don't know, like, by definition, this was the best path for me because that's the one I chose, kind of a weird.
Yeah, it's funny. I mentor a group of young entrepreneurs, and this one guy has an amazing business, young guy, smart as anything. And he chose where he was going to live based on where his office was. If he could cut down his commute, he figured he could be at the office longer. I'm like, well, what about other parts of your, your life, relationships and so forth? He goes, I'm 24. He goes, I want a beer once in a while and I want a girlfriend, kind of. That's his focus. And he's done really, really well in business, and everything's focused around just that. I'm not saying that's a great recipe for success and happiness, but it will help you get things done if your office is, I think it was like 55 yards from his office, his apartment. Wow. Yeah. And he was trying to figure out how he could actually live at the office. I was like, you're crazy.
Hey, that's what I do.
Yeah, this is a guy that, yeah, exactly. Well, yes. I just don't sleep all. Yes. Oh, that's true. You're in your living room.
That's right. Working from home, man. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense when you're doing podcasting, especially when you're doing interviews around the world, because you'll have somebody from Europe or from Asia, and with time differences, you're kind of working around their schedule. Now, Speaking about guests, tell us about some of your most interesting guests and some of the things, the takeaways that you learned along the way, because I know I learn all the time from my guests.
Gosh, there are some fun. So are we looking for like fun side hustle stories?
Everything. Throw it on out there.
So one of the very early episodes was a guy I think this was kind of like an episode that put the show on the map, was a guy whose claim to fame was earning enough money on Fiverr to buy a house in his first year on the platform. And I was like, hold up, like, how did that work? So Fiverr is the marketplace of goods and services where everything starts at $5. And so I was like, what could you possibly sell, for $5 that would, make you this kind of money? And so he's like, the key word there is starting at, it's all about the upsells. And so he went on to explain that, all of the, your $5 gig has got to be, something pre-created, some digital asset, right, that you can just send off in 2 seconds. And if somebody wants your time, like, they can buy that in the extras. And so he's a PR professional and kind of a copywriter by trade. And so he had like, I'll send you the 7 steps to a killer autoresponder sequence or something like that. And, that would be the $5 thing. And then in the extras, like, I will write message number 1 for you. I will write message number 2 for you. And kind of like, if you wanted to do that, like, he would sell that for the upcharge, for the upsell. And so that one was a really fascinating one. I met a guy who calls himself the flea market flipper, who makes a now full-time living just buying and selling random stuff from flea markets. He gave the example of finding a prosthetic leg for $30 or $40 and turning around and selling it on eBay for $1,000 the next day. I was like, dude, you found some, physical therapy exercise bikes for $200 or $300 and sold them for a couple grand, just random stuff. But what I love about that one is like, hey, anybody could do this, right? Like, there's no special skill set required, just kind of like an eye for, something that you think might be worth a little bit more. And even, if you have your phone, you could be walking around the market like, hey, what did similar things sell for, on eBay or on Craigslist in the past? So I really like that one. Another one that kind of stood out more for the advice, actually another flipping guy, makes a full-time living buying and selling stuff on Craigslist. But kind of as I wrap up the show with, hey, what's your number one tip for Side Hustle Nation? And what he said was, the best opportunities aren't visible until you're already in motion. And at the time, I was like, okay, that sounds kind of, hippie advice. But, the more I've thought about it, it's been a couple of years since we did that interview, like, dude, that was really deep. Like, that was actually really, really true, because you kind of have this momentum. The conversations that you have may lead to other ideas or other projects, or maybe just, how to do something better. It was in the research for, one of my completely failed sites that I happened upon an idea that led to one of my more successful sites. And it's just, you never know where the stuff is going to come from. But if you're sitting around doing nothing, you're not going to see it. You're not going to find it. And so I really liked that piece of advice. And of course, we've got 200 episodes of the Side Hustle Show. So there's lots of other nuggets in there as well.
I like what you said about that. From one of my failed sites, that's how I got a successful idea. A lot of times that's where it comes from, because you've just found a way that didn't work. And it's like, well, there's something here. I know I'm close. And it's like, okay, well, that didn't work. Maybe the opposite is what will work. And sometimes that's the case. I interviewed a woman that's an adventure racer, world-class adventure racer, world champion racer. And I said, you're in the middle of a jungle, and you have to get to a point that's 500 miles, on this map. It's a little dot. And I said, how do you know whether to go around the mountain to the left or around the right or over the mountain or through, how do you decide which way to go? And she said, keep moving. It's only as you're moving do you realize that other opportunities and other vantage points, other views become visible. So right in line with that comment. Speaking of which, as business owners, all the time, we get to points in our career, we get points in our day or week that we need to make a decision and we don't have all the information. And we have to go on gut and we've got to either go left, right, over, through. How do you make those decisions when you don't have all the information? Because very rarely do we have all the information. What's your decision-making process?
The decision-making process, actually I'll borrow this from a book called The Top 10 Distinctions Between Millionaires and the Middle Class. And I forget the author, but I'm pretty sure that's the title. He kind of gave this decision-making framework as it relates to kind of new ventures and stuff like that. He says, run it through this 3-question test. Number one, what's the most likely thing to happen? What's the worst case scenario? And what's the best case scenario, right? So it's like if you can live with the worst case scenario and the most likely scenario is positive, maybe that's a bet you ought to make, or maybe that's a path you might want to go down, because like I would consider myself like very risk averse, and it's kind of I don't want to make any bet you can't afford to lose, and that's kind of why the side hustle brand of entrepreneurship appeals to me, because it's like, well, hey, you start something low risk, all you have to lose is a few hours in the evening, maybe, not hopefully not a life changer.
Accountability is so important. Who holds you accountable?
Today, I've got a handful of mastermind groups that I'm a part of, and also have started to kind of like publicly, at least on the blog, talk about, what's going on in my life, like goals and, projects that are upcoming. So there's some level of public accountability on that. But I was a latecomer to the mastermind thing because I don't know, like I was just kind of in my own little hole, like working on my business kind of in a silo. And I think that was to my detriment for a lot of years. And so I kind of saw the light on the whole mastermind thing after somebody actually suggested to me, hey, you have this, modest at the time podcast following, you have this modest email following, you have this modest blog readership. I bet people would pay you to host a mastermind with them in it. And I was like, well, I'm always interested in people paying me, but I've never been in a mastermind myself. So, I had to open that up to kind of like a free beta group, testing group first, to see, what it was like, how I liked moderating that group and kind of the feedback and the flow from it. And what I found was, as we were going around kind of sharing our, weekly accountability segment, like what am I going to get done? Basically, I found myself coming to Sunday night all of a sudden, because we met on Mondays, like, oh, what did I tell the group that I was going to get done? Like, by definition, that had to have been a priority. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it. And if I'm going to treat it like a priority, I better get it done. So that was kind of really eye-opening to me, and kind of for the first time putting pen to paper in advance of like what I'm actually going to get done in a week's time. So that was kind of helpful for me.
And you said a real nice nugget in there is put it on social media. Hey, this is what I'm committing to doing. I did that in my health and fitness, and that was really the thing that turned the tables and really got me serious. And every 6 months, I do a photo shoot to kind of report in saying, hey, this is not something I just decided to do on a whim and get to the objective. And now I want to, it's going to reverse itself. I know every 6 months I'm going to be in front of a camera. And it's like, ooh, wow. I better stay focused.
Better stay on it. That's good. I was listening to AJ Jacobs. I think he was on the Tim Ferriss show, and he was talking about, different motivating factors. He said some people will, pledge a donation like up to the point that it hurts. Even a small amount would hurt, like to some organization you hate. So it's like, I pledged $500 to the KKK if I didn't do, such and such.
Right.
And he was like, I was definitely not going to let that happen. And it's like, that's kind of extreme, but I could definitely see how that would work.
Yeah, and the accountability groups are so important. I mentor a group of young entrepreneurs, that part of the entrepreneurs organization, and I went in, it's a year. I do it for 1 year. And I get there for the first meeting, and I'm there to be the moderator. I'm there to be the old guy at the table. Okay. And they're going through their shares of what they committed to last month and what they're going to do this month, and they turn to me. I'm like, no, I'm just here to like facilitate, make sure, and they're like, oh no, that's not the way our group works. I'm like, uh-oh. And of course, I'm there as the example, so I'm like, I've got to show up better than anybody, and there are no excuses of not getting the stuff done. I've got to make it happen. So, that pain factor and not wanting to let them down. We'll always do more for others than we'll do for ourselves. So grab that accountability and put some leverage to it.
Yeah, especially in a solopreneur situation, side hustle situation. It's like, I can put this off a week. Like, I got nobody to answer to.
Right. So nobody's looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, you got to give yourself somebody to answer to.
Absolutely. And get out there and just and do it. Tell me some of the best advice you've ever received in business.
Well, I told you about my dad's, it's not a piano piece of advice. I think of other good ones. Do or do not. There is no try is Yoda's advice. Those are kind of the two that kind of come to top of mind. It's like it kind of combines the, look, you gotta commit, you gotta take action. And on top of that, your first effort isn't going to be perfect. So just learn to live with that. Love it.
What keeps you up at night?
The million different ideas running through my head. Sometimes it's really hard to shut off. So that's where kind of like the mindfulness meditation practice comes in. And I learned this from Dan Harris from the 10% Happier book. Yep. And it's like, look, meditation doesn't have to be very complex at all. Like at a bare minimum, focus on your breath. When you find your mind wandering, return your focus to your breath. And like that simple exercise, a lot of times can cure that insomnia, but still sometimes it gets the better of me.
And that is so tough. It sounds so easy. If you've never done it, try it tonight. And it's like, oh my God, how can I not stay focused for just a short period of time?
It's really eye-opening in a lot of ways, and it's kind of it's a fun game, and you'll see just how crazy your brain is.
Yeah, it's a lot more difficult than it sounds. Tell me something that you could have done better 10 years ago.
10 years ago, so we're looking at 2007. So at that time, I was running the shoe business still on the side. What I could have done better at in that was scaling faster and hiring help faster because, and I didn't for a lot of reasons. Number one was, fear, like, hey, this person's not going to do as good a job as me. They're going to steal my idea, all sorts of lame excuses, basically why I couldn't hire somebody else. I don't want to give somebody access to my AdWords account. They're going to rip off my credit card information. They're going to spend all this money, like whatever. When I eventually did end up hiring somebody in 2009, it was a huge, weight and burden off my shoulders. All of a sudden, like I felt like the stuff I was doing, all day, every day wasn't necessarily rocket science, but it was time consuming. And so like when I finally got some help to do that, it was just like this huge breath of relief. And on top of that, I learned, years later that business wasn't going to last forever. Like that business just kind of had a finite lifespan because it played in the margin between the cost of traffic and what that traffic was worth. So, with the power of hindsight, I would have gone back and, really made an effort to scale that thing faster while the getting was good.
Thank you so much for listening today. I really do appreciate your time, and I hope you found today's show valuable. If you would like to receive these shows automatically to your phone or to your computer, simply go to iTunes and subscribe. After listening to several of the shows, if you're so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating, as this helps us reach additional people and spread the message. If you're truly committed to taking your life to the next level and doing whatever it takes to become a peak performer, but something's holding you back, something is blocking your way, and you just can't seem to figure out what it is, send me an email to info@thorconklin.com, and I'd be more than happy to get on the phone with you. We'll schedule a 15-minute discovery call. No obligation, no cost. I absolutely love to hear from the listeners, and if there's something I can do to help, I'd be more than happy to do that. Also, if you found something of great interest in today's show and you want to share that with your friends and family, simply go to my Facebook page, Thor Conklin, Click on the episode, hit the share button, and share it on your page. You can follow me at Twitter at Thor Conklin. The website is thorconklin.com. We're constantly adding new free resources, discussing additional tricks, tips, tools, and strategies on how to be a peak performer. Remember, I try to keep these episodes short so you can listen to them during dot time, doing other things, commuting, driving, walking, working out. Decide to be a peak performer in all that you do. And until tomorrow, have an absolutely amazing day. That concludes part 2 of our interview with Nick Loper. Please stay tuned later this week for part 3.